Hey everyone, welcome to our 529 Day in Saving for College webinar. I'm Mark Sir, Product Manager with Saving for College, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined today by Mr. Roger Young. He's a Thought Leadership Director with T. Rowe Price. Always enjoy having Roger on. He's become quite the staple of our webinar series. He's a certified financial planner who does a lot of reading, writing, research on these college financing topics. So he's got incredible professional expertise, but he's also a father who has used the 529 plan very effectively and has actually kind of gone through this whole process of opening a 529 plan through to withdrawals for his children. So it's really great to get that personal experience as well. So welcome, Roger. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Mark. Yes, happy to be here, and also happy to report my youngest just graduated.
Oh,
So,
amazing,
woo!
amazing. So you are now officially done with the personal 529 experience and can focus all on work, right?
Pretty much, yes, yes. So,
Awesome.
very excited.
Fantastic. Well, while we give everybody a moment to kind of join, get settled in, do want to remind everyone that this session is being recorded. So don't worry if you miss anything. If you're watching Netflix on the other screen, it's no problem. You'll be able to get this on YouTube, and we'll send you a link to that right after this session as soon as we can get it, uploaded to YouTube. And really appreciate those of you who've submitted questions. We're going to go through a number of the most common questions about 529 plans. I think it'll be helpful for folks, whether they're just starting out and trying to figure out if 529 plan's right for them and which 529 plan to choose, all the way through to folks who are getting ready for withdrawals. We're definitely going to cover that topic. Definitely going to talk about grandparent consideration. So I hope there's something for everybody here today. If you do have questions, go ahead and use that Q&A function here on Zoom. And we can try to get to those as we kind of move through the topics, any kind of points of clarification or anything like that. We're happy to kind of take care of those in real time. So please feel free to participate. And please join me, folks, in thanking our presenting sponsor, the T. Rowe Price College Savings Plan, for making this webinar available and free for all of you. For over 20 years, the T. Rowe Price College Savings Plan has been helping families save for college and other qualified education expenses in a tax-advantaged way. This 529 plan offers a variety of professionally managed investment options designed to address different time horizons and investment strategies. The plan also offers online tools and insights from T. Rowe Price certified financial planners so that families can develop their college saving strategies and be more confident about providing for their children's higher education needs. And I definitely say that that's kind of the theme for this webinar today, is confidence, right? Is we want to make sure that everybody's feeling very good about setting up their plan and using their 529 plan to all of the fantastic benefits that we're going to talk about here today. So let's jump right into things. We've only got an hour, so I want to make sure we can cover as much as possible. I think, let's start at the beginning. One of the very common questions, and one of the most difficult questions, frankly, to answer for folks is, how much do I need to save for college? If I look at one of our calculators, and I'll share a link for you folks to the Saving for College college cost calculator. But if I'm looking at the net price of an expense, or the sticker price of an expensive school, and I'm projecting that 18 years down the road, I'm going to come up with a huge number, and a huge number on a monthly basis that I need to save to cover that full amount. But I think, Roger, you and I would both agree that you don't need to save that whole amount to be successful in using a 529 plan. And I know you do a lot of research on what makes sense for a lot of families. So maybe you can speak a little bit to this and help folks set a good goal.
Okay. So yeah, Mark, the answer is $260 per month. Next question. No, just kidding. No, that's not the end of the answer. We have done research, and that is the number that we come up with as a starting point for people. But as you alluded to, it's really just a starting point, because your situation can vary quite a bit from someone else's in terms of the type of school, how many years, are you on campus or off? Do you expect to get, grant aid, either need-based or merit-based aid? But let me tell you a little bit about what goes into our $260 per month number. We're assuming a state college. We're assuming that it is, the child's going to live on campus. And we're assuming, potentially a 6% return on your investments in a 529 plan, 5% inflation on the costs of college over time, and that you're saving that amount from birth of the child, to and through the college years. So a lot of assumptions there. The other big one is that $260 is intended to get you to where you can pay for half of the sticker price of a college. So why only half? A number of reasons, but the big ones are most people pay around that, or on average, people pay around 50% is coming from the parents. And the other 50%, typically 25 or 30% on average, might come from grant aid. Again, that's free money, so to speak, in terms of scholarships or grants. And then the other 20% or so can come from other sources. So student loans, we don't recommend that being a big part of it, but it can certainly be some, or student income or gifts from other people. So 50% we think is a reasonable target, and it's what a lot of people do. But you might be thinking, as I'm going through this all, well, my situation's very different. I want my kid to be able to go to a very high level college where they don't give out a lot of merit aid, or we're a high earning family, we aren't going to get a lot of need-based aid, if any. Or the flip side, we're willing to go community college or have the child live at home for a while. So there are a lot of different ways to look at it. 260 is a starting point to think about. But yes, using calculators and doing your own math absolutely makes sense. Once you at least get past the hurdle of, well, okay, I at least have a baseline to think about.
No, that's awesome, Roger. And I gotta say, I really appreciate you. It's hard to come up with an actual number here in this answer. And the fact that you're willing to take a stab at it, right? And even if it's caveated by all of those assumptions, I think really does help folks here. Now they understand, right, what they need to think about in terms of what goes into this calculation, right? And how those particular factors are relevant or irrelevant to their particular situation. So I really appreciate that answer, Roger.
Thanks. Yeah, for a long time, I was hesitant to toss out a number like that, but my colleagues won me over and said, yeah, a lot of people could benefit from at least a starting point. So that's what we're giving.
And there's a quick clarification question here from Chrisanne. Yes, that $260 would be for one child. So if you're saving for multiple children, you would want to increase it, of course. So thank you for that. And yeah, Kiana, $260 per month was the figure that Roger threw out. So we kind of hit on this just a little bit. There are a lot of different expenses that go into going to college, right? You've got your tuition and fees, and that's probably your bulk. But look, room and board, very expensive these days. Books, are not so cheap either. And over the last few years, 529 plans have actually become this much more broadly usable vehicle around higher education, even secondary education expenses. And so, Roger, I'm going to pull up our little cheat sheet here that has the grid of all of the different qualified expenses, so that folks can look at this. And I'm going to drop this link here down in the chat so that everybody can check it out. It's a super helpful this little chart here, right? I think is fantastic because it'll tell you if something is or is not qualified. And there are a few surprises, I think, in here too. So computers, you can actually use your 529 plan for a computer so long as it's being used for college. That was a somewhat recent change, I think back like 2015, where we added the computers as a qualified expense. Student loans now, even if you have actually already taken out student loans and you have a 529 plan, you can use that 529 plan to pay up to $10,000 for the student loans. Note that that's a lifetime limit. So there's no, it's 10,000 per life. So just keep that in mind. And there are a couple of, expenses that a lot of folks ask about that are actually not qualified education expenses. And the big ones here are the transportation and travel costs, and then the health insurance. And that's even if that health insurance policy is being offered actually directly by the school. A kind of next level question here around transportation and travel costs, like study abroad, right? So we talk about you can use a 529 plan to study abroad. You can use it for your tuition and fees for your room and board. You cannot use it for your flight to Milan. So just keep that in mind, right? When you're thinking about using the 529 plan for study abroad, you certainly can use it. Just be mindful. Transportation, just as if you were going from home to school, not a qualified expense. So those are, I think, important points to make. Anything else you would highlight here, Roger, in terms of qualified expenses, and how folks can use this effectively? Oh, great question here, actually, from David, and maybe you can cover this one, Roger. Off-campus housing. Maybe you have some experience with this one fairly recently and can give the folks some advice.
I do. Yeah. So, in general, I would say, when you look at this list, it's a pretty complete list. And even with some of those things you mentioned that aren't qualified, room and board is a nice one. Some of the tax benefits you might be able to apply for or get on your tax return relative to college expenses do not include room and board, but 529s do. So I think that's worth noting. In terms of the room and board, yes, if you're off campus, you can do it. You have to look up what the college identifies as the expected amount of room and board expenses. And I will say from personal experience, where my youngest went to school, his rent was quite a bit higher than the college estimate of the board expenses, and he had to do a 12-month lease as opposed to just during the regular school year. So yeah, you do want to be careful to stay within the bounds, under the law. But in general, there are a lot of good ways to use 529 money. You mentioned the student loans, which is more recent. K through 12 tuition, also a more recent change. And then, if there's money left over, there's potentially some of the money could go to continuing education or vocational school. Even some apprenticeships, qualify. So there are a lot of kind of non-traditional ways to think about using 529 funds. My colleague Lindsay Theodore did a nice article about the variety of ways that you can use these funds in qualified ways.
And this is an ongoing theme, right? Legislation is constantly being considered around expanding 529 plan qualified expenses. So keep an eye out on the news around that. And I would, imagine for folks with younger children, you might find 10, 15 years down the road, there's a whole new, variety of pathways that you can use a 529 plan for. And I just want to kind of go back to that, first question around setting a goal, especially if you're a grandparent, an aunt or uncle, and you're trying to think about what an appropriate amount to save in a 529 plan is. You can kind of look at this list here and say, well, I want to have, enough to cover books. And that's going to be my goal, right? For my grandchild or for my niece or for my nephew. And that's just another way that you kind of go about, setting a goal. So hopefully that's helpful for folks.
Mhm.
And so if none of those are okay, Roger, if none of those, variety of educational expenses are going to be incurred, or maybe there's a special situation, right, like a scholarship, a child's going to a U.S. service academy, not going to college at all. What are some of the options, around here? Maybe we can just kind of go through these here, Roger, starting with the scholarships.
Well, I guess one thing overall to mention is, you can change the beneficiary on your 529 account. So if you have multiple children and one doesn't need all of that money, you can shift it to another. You can shift it to yourself. So there are some different options. But yes, if all of those things don't apply and you need to take the money out, well, with a scholarship, you have the benefit that there's no penalty involved with taking out money, up to the amount of the scholarship. Now, there still would likely be taxes on the gains, not on the principal you put in, but on the gains in that situation. But that's no worse than, say, putting it in a regular taxable account and you pay taxes on gains. So I wouldn't say that that's a huge deterrent. But yeah, these are accounts where you maintain control over the account, and if you do need to take the money out for other purposes, you can do that. You just have to be aware of the potential taxes and penalties on it. So I think you don't want to oversave in a 529, but I don't hear too many people complaining that they oversaved in a 529. So at least that's my perspective.
Yeah, exactly. And I know a lot of folks are very concerned around the financial aid impacts. We'll go into it a little bit more, but when we're talking about merit athletic scholarships, remember that there's this special provision with 529 plans where you can take that money out, you'll pay the taxes like Roger was discussing, but you're not going to have that same 10% penalty that you would with a non-qualified withdrawal, which is again also an option for you if you really want to get that money out. And remember that that penalty is only going to apply to the earnings portion of what you have in the account. So what you contributed will never be penalized. So I think that's important. And we've also got a really exciting provision here now, finally coming into effect here as of the beginning of the year. So as part of the Secure 2.0 overhaul at the end of 2022, I think it was passed. We're actually now able to roll over 529 funds to a Roth IRA in most states, tax and penalty free. So if you're at the point where you're thinking about this, please reach out to your plan. They've done an incredible job of educating, their teams around this provision, and they're going to be able to give you more specific answers on state specific, kind of questions. But for folks who are just starting out, the point here is you do not need to worry so much about this question of what's going to happen to the money if I oversave, because you can bring over up to $35,000 to a Roth IRA, obviously subject to certain limitations. All of your normal Roth IRA restrictions will apply except for the maximum income limit. Actually, that's the one that does not come into play there. But you do still need to have earned income for the beneficiary. So if your child doesn't have, the amount that you're trying to transfer in earned income, that won't work. So keep that in mind. But this is a really fantastic provision that I think just alleviates a lot of the anxiety and stress around what am I going to use this money for. Anything you wanted to add there, Roger?
Sure, yeah, it's just another example of ways that you can use 529 money that have expanded over the years. My colleague Judy Ward just did a nice piece on this topic, explaining the rules a little bit more thoroughly. And I do want to highlight what you alluded to just a moment ago in terms of the limits for a Roth in general. And so yes, the child needs to have at least as much in earned income as the amount that's being transferred into a Roth IRA in a year. And you mentioned the $35,000. Well, the annual limit is currently $7,000. So you think about that, it would probably take 5 years to take full advantage of the $35,000 lifetime amount, and it needs to have been in there for 5 years. So that could be potentially a little confusing as there's money going in, coming out. But think about it in terms of, well, what was in the account 5 years ago? And so, a lot of rules, but yes, companies are starting to provide the right paperwork and processes to make this happen. And it has to be for the beneficiary that's named on the account. So you can't put it in, if you're the parent, as an example, you can't transfer it into your own Roth IRA. It would go into the Roth IRA of the child who's the beneficiary. Also rules and questions on what the IRS is going to interpret on this. Things like, well, what if I change beneficiaries? I would say for now, without giving specific tax advice, try and obey the spirit of the rule in terms of the beneficiary on it. So that's all I'll say. I can't give tax advice. So, but yes, it is a nice additional feature compared to having to take taxes and penalties potentially. You can extend the tax benefit of that money you've put in.
Fantastic. Thanks, Roger. So I want to pause here for just a moment, take some questions on qualified expenses. So a few of you have actually asked about programs and schools abroad, not just study abroad, but an actual foreign university. Steve, in your question, you nailed the answer here, where you say if it's eligible for the FAFSA for federal student aid. That's the question you have to ask, and you need to make sure that they accept U.S. student aid. And in that case, you can use the 529 plan at a foreign college or university. That is no problem. Just want to take a look. There also were some questions around credits, how many credits you have to be taking. So with the room and board, you do need to be enrolled half-time. But for tuition and fees, I often say, you can actually go do a language program if you want as an adult. You want to go take a course on Italian at the local community college, you can do that and use your 529 funds. So there's no minimum, amount of credits you have to be taking from that perspective. It's just when you want to use it for room and board. There you do have to be enrolled at least half-time. And half-time, Joseph, is typically 12 credits. Do I have that right, Roger? I think it's going to depend on the school, but I think typically it's around 12 credits.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know the specific answer. I know, a common course load for a student would be, 15 credits or so per semester. So half might be less than the 12, but I don't have
Yeah,
a
I
specific
think you're
answer
right.
on that.
Yeah, I think 12 is actually what is considered full-time is the minimum. And then I imagine the answer would be 6 there, Joseph, but take a look at the particular school because schools do credits in different ways. But that's going to depend on them. Just want to make sure. Okay. Yeah. Let's. A quick question with this $35,000 limit. It is per beneficiary. Yes.
Yes.
And question on which plan must be open for the 15 years, the Roth or the 529. It is the 529 that's got to be open. That's a good question, Michael. Appreciate that.
Good.
Okay. So let's move on to some of the tax benefits, and this is really why you open the 529. I think at the core level, right, is to get this tax advantage, tax-free growth when using it for qualified education expenses. So maybe Roger, you can kind of break down the different tax benefits that the 529 plan offers.
Great. So from a federal tax perspective, when you put money into a 529 account, you don't get a tax break at that time. So it's not like putting money into a traditional IRA or a traditional 401k account. It's in a sense a little more like putting money into a Roth account where you don't get the benefit up front, but when you take the money out, if you're using it for the qualified expenses, there's no tax on the growth or earnings of the account. So that's a very nice benefit for a lot of people, and particularly if you have the account open for a lengthy period of time where you can take advantage of a significant amount of growth potentially. There's also possibly state tax benefits. So here you have to look into the specific rules for your state. Some states don't offer anything. Some states will give you, potentially a tax deduction up to a certain amount if you use that state's plan. Some others will, there are, I think, a few where you can get a state tax deduction if you use any plan, not just the one for that state, which is kind of nice. So really look into your state and what the tax situation is for your particular state. I think, Mark, you alluded to it earlier with one of the rules that sometimes when the federal government does things that expand the definition of qualified expenses, it can take the state's time to either catch up to it, or they might not choose to completely align with what the federal government says is a qualified expense. So you do have to be a little bit careful about, if you've taken advantage of a state benefit, are you using the money then in a way that's appropriate for the state, or could you face, a clawback of some of those benefits that you've gotten? So, a little bit nuanced, but for the kind of main use for a 529, traditional college, tuition fees, room and board, most states, that is a qualified expense.
Yeah, I appreciate you making that point, Roger, because I, living in Florida with no state income tax, tend to neglect that point. But there are, especially when we're talking about the K through 12, now that you're able to use it for K through 12 tuition, student loans, and now with this Roth IRA rollover, those are some of the provisions where if you're going to use it for that purpose, make sure that if you're in a state where you've taken a state tax benefit, that they, what we call, conform to the federal guidelines of qualified education expenses. It's a really great point, Roger, and I appreciate that one.
Mhm.
But ultimately, a lot of different tax benefits, right, from the federal tax deferred growth to possible state income taxes. So now we've decided that 529 plans are great, right? And we can actually really benefit from it and use it for a variety of education expenses. How do we choose one? So we know that 529 plans are offered by individual states. And so a big question that's come up many times in the registration, probably also in the Q&A here, do you have to open your state's plan? If you open your state's plan, do you have to go to a school in that state? Do you have to go to a public school in that state? And the answer there, generally speaking, is no. If you've opened a prepaid 529 plan, there may be more restrictions around how you can best benefit from the 529 plan. You'll want to go to those, state schools. But for when we're talking about the 529 college savings plan, right, you do not have to go to a particular school or go to a school in a particular state or open your state's plan. You have full reign over that. I'll say there are a couple of states that do have residency restrictions on their 529 plan, but really only a handful of them. So hopefully that answers that question pretty sufficiently. And then another really common question, and this is where I think a lot of folks get tripped up when they're actually going through the account opening process, is around the investment options and understanding what is it exactly we are investing in here in this 529 plan. Can I pick my stocks? The answer there, unfortunately, is no. But maybe Roger, you can kind of speak to some of the different investment options, and I'll pull up our comparison tool here so we can workshop some of these other considerations for everybody.
Okay, so commonly the investments would be mutual fund based, and in a lot of states there's an option to base the investments on the expected college entry date of the student. So if you think that you're going to have a student entering college 15 or 18 years from now, you put the money into one that targets the date of enrollment. And the way those tend to work, you might be familiar with the concept from your retirement accounts, where it starts out relatively aggressive, so more in stocks, less in bonds, and then shifts over time as you approach the date you're going to use it to be more in cash and bonds and less risky investments instead of more aggressive stocks. So that's a very common way of doing things. But states generally will also give you options of portfolios where it's just choosing single funds, or choosing an all equity portfolio or an all bond portfolio. So I think there are different options. It can be actively managed funds like my company tends to offer. It can be based more on index funds. So a lot of choices depending on the state and who manages the investments. But I think I personally have liked the enrollment date based plans, and I think those have worked out pretty well for a lot of people. And it helps you not have to worry about it year to year because they're making the adjustments over time for you. I should note that when Congress set up the legislation allowing 529 plans, they didn't want people micromanaging this or day trading it. So there's a restriction. You can only make 2 kind of big investment changes per year. Now, the changes that the plan makes, for example, adjusting that equity level over time, that's not considered a strategic change that limits your number. But you might make the choice of, well, I feel like differing a little bit from the path that the enrollment date plan has me on, so I do want to shift from one fund to another. And you can do that a couple times a year. I would say, even as someone who's very into finance like I am, I've never felt particularly constrained by that 2 per year limit. So but it is something to think about, if you're the type of person who likes to, be more actively involved in choosing the investments, more than a few times a year.
And Roger, I'd be right in saying, even if I've exhausted my 2 investment option changes in the year, if I'm contributing new funds to the plan, I can decide whichever investment option that wants to get to, right?
Yeah, so yeah, the new investments, that is not a strategic change in the investment. Similarly, when you take money out, you can choose which of the funds to take the money out from. And that's not considered one of your two changes. So yeah, there's still some flexibility that you have. And yes, you very may well decide, especially as you're getting close to college, that you want to do things a little bit differently. If you are, for example, worried about, having money in stocks at that point, or, something I was thinking about earlier today, if you think, well, I might have some of that money left over and take advantage of the 529 to Roth, well, that kind of changes your time horizon on that piece of money. So you could potentially be a little bit more aggressive with that. Now, again, not to give specific investment advice, but you can think about those types of things. And again, once or twice a year, you can make those type of changes.
Awesome. Thank you, Roger. And so I've shared a link now in the chat to our 529 plan comparison tool here. So if you're trying to figure out what plan might be right for you, I think this is a phenomenal place to start. It's going to give you a lot of information because we collect this data for every single 529 plan, but it gives you a really nice place to just browse what is available and figure out if, your state's plan is similar to other ones, if it's a little bit different, get a sense of that sort of thing. And so you can select up to 3 features here to compare them on. If you're a pro subscriber, you can do up to 6. But I want to look at a few of these things. So let's first start with the state tax deduction or credit for contributions. I think that's obviously a big consideration for folks. I saw a question in the Q&A about maximum contributions. I usually look at the minimum contributions, but we'll look at maximum for that user today. And let's also look at what some of the static investment options are, because they'll all offer age-based and enrollment year investment options. So maybe I'm looking for something in particular for my investment option. I want to find a plan that shows that. So you just hit your comparison button here, and it's going to give you a list in state alphabetical order of every single 529 plan and what you are looking to compare. So it's a great place to browse, just try to get a sense of what, a particular plan offers, how that compares to some of the other plans out there. And hopefully that's useful for folks. And I just see here a question about a yearly contribution limit. So here we have the aggregate contribution limits. So you won't be able to contribute if you exceed these amounts, but you can see they're really, really high amounts, right? A lot of north of $500,000, and some of them are really cheeky with $529,000, right? That's very cute. But you shouldn't be restricted very much there. On a yearly basis, you're going to want to take a look at what the yearly gift tax exclusion is. You can contribute more than that, but then that's going to be a gift subject to taxation. So folks generally look at that as an effective limit of a yearly contribution. I'm pretty sure that's $18,000 this year. And for those of you who have maybe some more assets that you want to put into it right away, 529 plans have a really cool little provision that we call super funding, where you're able to take a 5-year declaration of that gift tax. So you can do that 18,000 times 5 at once, and then you just can't, use your gift tax exclusion for the following 4 years. But that's a great way to kind of, get a lump sum in there. It reduces, your estate or your taxable estate by a bunch right away. So that's a really popular provision with grandparents and folks with a little bit more of an asset base, but unique to 529 plans, so worth mentioning. So let's go back to our slides, and well, that's actually perfect, right? We were just talking kind of about grandparents, and I know there were some questions here, and we always think it's important to cover this. It really requires help from everybody if you want to be effective in saving for college. So grandparents they play a huge role, I think, and financial aid comes into play here a lot. But fortunately, we have, with the new FAFSA, grandparents are probably the folks who are most pleased with the new FAFSA. because if they own a 529 plan, how it used to be was that money, once it gets distributed to the student, would count as the student's income. So for financial aid, in the following year, that's going to count as their income and have a really negative impact on their financial aid. That is no longer the reality with the new FAFSA. And in fact, whether you're a grandparent or anyone else besides the parent, any third party that's contributing to a student's education is not considered at all in the FAFSA. So that has really alleviated the big concern for grandparents who are owning their own 529 account. They may have chosen to just gift into the parents' account at that time to not impact the financial aid. But now if a grandparent wants to own the account themselves and not impact the financial aid of their beneficiary, that's a possibility now. And so it's 100% up to you as a grandparent whether you want to simply gift into a 529 plan that's already been established by the parent, or if you want that control over the 529 plan by being the owner yourself. So now grandparents really can do it however they want. Anything that you want to mention here, Roger?
Yeah, I would say the strategy is kind of flipped from it being better to put it in the parent's account to being in some ways better to hold it in a grandparent's account, because as you said, those grandparent assets aren't counted, whereas parental assets are counted in the financial aid calculations. Now, not nearly as big a factor as parental income, but still a factor. And so, yeah, I think that's important to mention. And you did allude to people who might face the estate tax, or who want control over their money, but to get it out of the estate. 529 plans are kind of unique in that combination for estate planning purposes. And of course, there's a limit to it, which we've mentioned. So yeah, I think for grandparents, it's really a nice feature that the law is allowing now that wasn't there in the past. As a little bit of a tangent, the rollout of the new FAFSA hasn't exactly been seamless, but I would encourage people who are listening, who are thinking about it for a future year, even if you're not sure about how to fill out the form or whether you're going to get need-based aid. If you're at all unsure, go ahead and fill it out. And for a lot of people, filling it out has gotten easier. For some people, it's gotten harder. And of course, the kind of bugs have made it harder for people than it should be. But I would say don't let that deter you. You see negative things in the news, and you're hearing me say negative things, but do strongly consider filling out the FAFSA, and you might be pleasantly surprised that it helps you a bit.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Roger, because I know it has been a very stressful period for folks, but hopefully now this simplified FAFSA is actually simpler for folks moving forward. A question from Susan about the timing around this. And so I think, Susan, you're thinking of what we used to kind of use as a loophole for grandparents. So remember, the FAFSA looks at prior year income. And so remember that distribution from the 529 plan would be considered student income, right? But if you wait until the last 2 years of school, then it'll never come into play in the FAFSA. So that was kind of the loophole that grandparents would have to use. Now that's no longer a consideration. So you can use it for all 4 years of school for the child. Yes. And Michael, right, like anybody but the grandparent now can contribute, and it doesn't affect financial aid at all. So that's really good.
Anyone but the parent. Yep.
Exactly. And a question about how the relationship between income and scholarships. And we touched on it a little bit before, but I think it's important to hammer home, right, that the amount of money that you have in the 529 plan, the amount of income that you have, it's not going to impact merit scholarships, athletic scholarships. Those don't come into play. So don't let the fact that you think your child's going to get an athletic scholarship be a reason that they don't start saving in the 529 plan, please.
Yep. Also, however, don't overestimate the likelihood of huge athletic scholarships or merit scholarships. I mean, it varies widely, and unfortunately, the merit scholarship world is still kind of opaque. Even if you go to a college's net price calculator, they might only give you an idea of need-based aid and not merit-based aid. They might give you an idea of merit, but of course it's not guaranteed. So yeah, just be careful. A lot of sports, even if a child gets an athletic scholarship, which is only for Division I, a lot of sports, it's not even a full scholarship. Typically isn't going to include room and board. So yeah, just don't overestimate aid. I've said you don't want to be in a position where you have high income and low savings, or that you've overestimated how much aid and you've undersaved as a result. So just a lot of caveats there.
Thanks, Roger. Appreciate that. Just want to again, we've got a lot of questions, and I apologize, folks. There's no way we're going to be able to cover all of these. You can always find more resources on savingforcollege.com. I'll do my best to include some resources and links in our follow-up email here that'll include the recording, so you'll be able to do some more research. Okay. Let's move on to our next question, though, because this has come up several times actually in the Q&A. It's been asked a few different ways about whether, if I'm saving for more than one child, can I use one 529 plan? If I'm saving for one child, can I have multiple 529 plans? And so firstly, I'll say there's no limitation on how many 529 plans can be opened for a given beneficiary. I like to tell the story of our founder at savingforcollege.com, Joe Hurley, who opened all of the 529 plans when he was doing research, on the industry. So you can open as many as you wish. I don't really know why you would want to do that. But you don't have to worry, right? If you have a 529 plan for your child, the aunt, the uncle, the grandparent, they all have 529 plans. That's okay. That's totally fine. But when you're saving for more than one child, this question comes up where do we need to use multiple 529 plans? Maybe it's just easier to have one and then change the beneficiary. I have a strong opinion on that. Roger, I'll let you go first. Of what you've done this, right? You've had multiple
Yep.
children, so maybe you could. What did you have? Just one 529 plan for all of them?
No, we had three separate ones for our three kids, and I would say that's generally what I would recommend. I didn't find it terribly administratively difficult. And if you're trying to maintain some sense of fairness among your kids, across your kids, it's nice to have the separate accounts. Now with the potential of shifting some of that money to Roth at the end, it's good to have the beneficiaries kind of clean. I've heard, and in fact, the guy who taught my CFP course said, "Oh, just open up one and then sort out the beneficiaries later." I tend to go the other way on that, but I wouldn't say it's the biggest or most important thing that we're covering here today.
Thanks, Roger. Yeah, and I do agree, right? You want to, especially from an investment perspective, you could have different time horizons, and you want to make sure you're thinking about that wisely. Um, and so kind of similar when we're talking about time horizons, and this has come up a lot in the Q&A here. So maybe we can spend a couple of minutes. It's hard, obviously, when you've got an older child and they're a senior and you're starting to see like what your bill might be. But I still think that there are reasons to have a 529 plan. The first thing I'd say is if you've already got some kind of a savings account built up where you have a few $1,000s and you're in a high yield savings account, we're kind of fortunate right now where those sorts of investments actually have a decent yield. But remember that you pay tax on that if it's in your typical high yield savings account. You're not going to get that same tax advantage as you do with the 529 plan. So you're going to see, whatever your marginal tax rate is, 20-25% is going to be a haircut, off of that 4-5% that you're making each year. So I would consider, whether or not that tax savings is worth opening up a 529 plan. But Roger, what would you say for these folks? And there are quite a few of them here who are kind of late to the game, but want to make sure that they're doing as much as they can to benefit from this program.
Yeah, I think you hit on a key factor there that yes, now you can make some money in more conservative investments like shorter term bonds and cash. And you can do that within a 529 plan as well as an outside savings account. And so, yeah, there is that tax benefit. Yes, you don't have the number of years to benefit from, higher potential growth of a 529 if you're getting a late start. But it is nice to earmark that money and have it set aside and kind of mentally give yourself that restriction that you want to use it for college. So both from a behavioral standpoint and a tax standpoint, I think there's still some benefit. But yes, it's more beneficial potentially if you can get an earlier start. A few years ago, I would have said, when the interest rates were super low, it was harder to justify opening up an account late in the game. But now it can make some sense.
And there are certain states, folks, actually, that have a really interesting concept called a tax carry forward, where if you contribute this year an amount that's in excess of what their state tax deduction limit is, there are certain states that let you carry that forward into future years. And so if you do, again, have money set aside for school, this is just kind of another tax efficient move, that you can make. Some questions here. There was a question about if grandparents benefit at all from the tax benefits. And so obviously on the growth side from the federal taxes, they still benefit there. And if you have a state tax deduction or credit, the grandparent can typically get that as well. If they're in that particular state, they open, that 529 plan. Certain states will even allow them to take the deduction if they don't own the account. So if they're contributing as a gift to a parent-owned account, certain states will allow, the contributor, so that grandparent, to take the benefit themselves. So yes, there are some benefits for the grandparents as well.
Yeah.
And a sad question here that I do think is very, very important to cover. If the account owner dies, whether it's a grandparent, parent, whomever is the account owner, what happens there? And so when you open a 529 plan, you will have the opportunity to designate what they call a successor owner. And we strongly advise you to do that and to keep it out of probate, state law, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and you might, if you're a grandparent, for example, you might consider making the successor, your child, the parent of the student, the successor, to again reduce the chance that it passes to someone, who then, also passes away. So, yeah, number of considerations.
Excellent. And we'll go back to the Q&A here, but I want to get our last question covered for the folks who have a 529 plan, for the folks who are, toward the end of that savings journey. Withdrawals. We've done our job for the last 18 years, right? But we need to, make sure we finish it so that we actually benefit from the 529 plan's tax benefits. Roger, maybe you could speak a little bit about the different ways that money can get from the 529 plan to you or to the school or wherever that needs to be to actually pay the expenses. And then I'll talk about the timing, because that's really, really important. And folks, if you have a 529 plan and you're not aware of this, I saw at least one question in the Q&A. This is extremely important, so stay tuned.
Yeah, so typically, the company that manages a plan will give you some different options. One is to have the money go to the owner, and that's what I've done, so that I kind of maintain the records on it, manage the tax aspect of it correctly, and make sure I stay below what I've spent on qualified expenses. It could potentially go to the beneficiary. It could potentially go directly to the school. Again, I found it easiest to have it go to me, and I managed it from there. But there could be pros and cons of different approaches. So Mark, maybe I'll let you take it from here in terms of how that fits in with the timing and staying within the proper years of expenses and all that.
Yeah, this is a really important point because I think that this is really the one thing at this point in the process where it can actually trip you up. And it's a mistake that I don't want anybody on this webinar to make. So 529 plan expenses that must be incurred when the withdrawal was made. So this comes up especially around the second semester, right? If that tuition bill is due in December, you need to make your withdrawal in December. You cannot pay the tuition bill in December, make the withdrawal in January of the next calendar year, and then have that be a qualified expense. So this is really, really important, especially, if it's you got the holidays going on, so a lot goes on right at that time of the year. So please just keep an eye on your calendar, know when your tuition bills are due, know when you need to make the room and board payments, and make sure that you make those withdrawals in that same calendar year that you have those expenses. All right, so we've got just a few minutes here. Bear with me as I'm going to try to go through some of these questions here. So what if I set up a 529 and then move to another state or another country? So first, you could do nothing. You could keep the 529 plan as it is. If you move to a state where, say, you have like higher state taxes and there's a really good state tax benefit with the 529 plan, you can roll over 529 funds to a different 529 plan. There was a question about this. You could also roll them over to in 529 ABLE plan if your beneficiary has disabilities. So there is that flexibility when the money's never stuck right in the 529 plan. So that's an important note.
Or you could just open up a new account in your new state and have new contributions go there. You don't necessarily have to roll it over. So yeah, there are different options. I ended up with plans for my kids in two different states because my state didn't offer one at first, and we lived in a couple different places. So yeah, it wasn't wasn't a particular administrative hassle to have plans in two different states ultimately.
Excellent. So some questions on investment options here. Are enrollment date funds similar to age-based funds? Yes, they are. They're pretty much the same. They've just kind of changed the way that they do them for administrative purposes. Because you think about it, if you had a 1 to 4 year age base and then your child became 5, then you would have to move people to the new portfolios. Now they just set it up as the enrollment year. And so you do the 2040 enrollment year, and then you can stay in that portfolio. The portfolio changes as time goes. So it's just an administrative back end thing. You really don't have to worry about it. They are, yes, same concept. If I rebalance my 529 portfolio back to my target allocation, does that count as an investment change? And so I'm assuming here that you are not in one of those enrollment date or age-based funds, and that you've created, your own portfolio based on the individual investment options. And now you're going to shift it toward, closer to the age-based. That is an investment option change. So keep that in mind.
Again, there's research on rebalancing, and if it's not, it kind of does it automatically for you if you're in, an enrollment date type of investment. But if you're doing it on your own, it's hard to do it, super often, and I don't think you get a whole lot of benefit out of doing it more than twice a year anyway. So yeah, but you do want to think about if you're in kind of an actively involved investor, if you've done one of them for a year, you want to kind of maintain your flexibility for what that second one would be during the year.
Excellent. A question here that I do want to clarify. So you say the son's college only provides the cost of attendance for a whole year, but the students register at halftime. Like, how do we calculate the off-campus expenses? So I was maybe a little confusing there. As long as they have halftime, as long as they're registered halftime, then you can use the 529 for off-campus expenses. So that's just the requirement there, and you can use it whatever's published.
Yeah, you don't have to cut the amount in half. Yeah, they don't cut your rent in half, sadly, for being a part-time student. So yeah, you can use that full amount, and as I mentioned earlier, may or may not actually be as much as what the rent is. So
Exactly. And a great similar question here from Nancy. Is there a maximum per year that you can take out for the expenses? So you're going to want to look at what Joseph had just referenced there is the published cost of attendance, which will be available, on the school's website. You want to make sure you don't go over that amount because then it would be non-qualified, regardless of what expense we're talking about, room and board, tuition and fees, books. Got to keep it within the published cost of attendance. So there's a question here about if a parent's military benefits will pay for the children's school and no longer need to use 529 funds. Can we deduct without a penalty similar to scholarship? I think that is a little bit different. And I don't know that we went too deep into it, but like if you do get admitted to a service academy, right, that is an opportunity where you can take that amount out without the penalty. But it sounds like in this scenario, it would still be a non-qualified withdrawal. So maybe take a look at how that benefit is actually being implemented in this from the school's perspective, whether it is kind of like a scholarship, then you might be able to do it that way. Some questions around like transferring 529s between siblings, relatives. Absolutely. I can include an article in the follow-up for folks if that's of interest. Oh, great question. What if the amount exceeds that aggregate limit that we had shown kind of earlier, where it was like over 500,000? So you're not going to get kicked out of the plan. They're not going to make you withdraw anything from the plan. You just won't be able to contribute new dollars to the plan until that amount goes below their aggregate limit. Okay, there's a good question here that I can't get into so well because I'm not expert in this, but it's a good point, and it's around the American Opportunity Tax Credit and making sure that you benefit from that as well as using your 529 plan. And yes, you're going to want to not use the 529 plan for an amount up to allow you to get the AOTC. Again, we have articles on this on saving for college that might be worth looking at, but this is a little bit more of a complex topic. I don't know, Roger, if you're able to talk about this at all, just from your personal experience.
yeah, I would say yes. There are rules about kind of double dipping and getting multiple benefits is kind of the overview. And I will just say that using tax software without mentioning tax software company names, it was the most complicated part of my tax returns for multiple years, making sure that the software properly, considered things qualified expenses and didn't try to, have me overpay taxes. So, and that is something you do want to be careful with, and you might, for some of these years, consider using, a tax professional if you're not super comfortable with what the tax software does for you. So, you know, not to say there are negatives of using 529 money, but that would be the one where I'd say it's a little bit more of a hassle than I would have hoped.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm glad some folks added this here at the end because it may be something that folks want to research a little bit more. And so, Roger, Pamela would like us to cover this question. So, when you made your withdrawals, were you able to do those all tax-free, or did you have any non-qualified withdrawals at the end? What's the status there?
I believe yes, I've used all of it for qualified expenses. I still need to kind of do a little cleanup with my son's account who just graduated. But yeah, I was able to use it for qualified expenses, which worked out well. So I did not oversave in my 529 as another way of thinking about that.
Fantastic. I think that's a great one to end on. Folks, really appreciate you all joining us. Unfortunately, we are out of time here today, but I'm sure we'll have Roger on sometime very soon. Thanks again to our wonderful presenting sponsor, the T. Rowe Price College Savings Plan. Make this free webinar available for all of you. And thanks to the folks who joined us. I mean, we had a record of over 1,000 registrants for today's webinar. Really appreciate those of you who've joined us live. If you're going to be watching the recording afterward, we'll be sharing that very shortly. So thank you, because you're doing something really amazing for your families and loved ones. And we really hope that we've been able to help you out a little bit here today. So cheers and thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you all.